You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Thank you for choosing the red pill. Time to explore that rabbit hole after all. Ever wanted to know what happens after the conclusion of the Matrix films? Well, that's what Matrix Online, developed by highly respected Monolith Studios, aimed to do for its fans. It was an MMO adaptation of the series that was going to be continuing the franchise's story. But if it found its way into my Death of a Game series, we know at some point something went wrong. Really wrong. I'm talking third Matrix movie wrong. Let's take a journey through the Matrix to find out why Matrix Online ultimately died.
Here we go.
Matrix, a late 90s and early 2000 juggernaut of a series. Between all three of the movies, it was able to generate over $500 million. A story of humans existing in the Matrix, a simulated reality created by sentient machines to control the humans, as well as set in a dystopian future setting. Specifically following the story of Thomas Anderson, aka Keanu Reeves, aka Neo. Besides the final movie in the trilogy not being quite up to par, Matrix as a whole is a very well-respected trilogy and universe. So when Warner Bros. Studio, the studio behind the movie, expressed interest in a MMO adaptation of the title, in the early 2000s, it was met with great fan enthusiasm worldwide. Warner Bros. Would slate developer Monolith Studios to handle the creation of Matrix Online, often dubbed MXO. Monolith at the time had released titles in the late 90s and early 2000s, Shogo Mobile Armor Division, Alien vs Predator 2, Tron 2.0, and a couple of spy titles in the form of No One Lives Forever. Monolith of the more present day is known for cult classics such as Fear, Condemned, and Shadow of Mordor. What was even more exciting for the fans of the series was that the Wachowskis, the franchise creators, gave their blessing to the notion of gamers inheriting the storyline, as they put. The Wachowskis had this to say concerning the impending launch of MXO. Our expectations are high, perhaps unreasonably so, but only because we're anxious for a really good MMO as every other gamer. Obviously, the most important thing we're looking for is for it to be fun, to be a game that we'd be interested in playing. Right now, the idea of MMOs, a multitude of gamers jacked into the same computer-generated dream world, is more interesting than the game itself. We are hoping that Matrix Online changes that. Ubisoft and WB Games were going to co-publish the title for developer Monolith. But Ubisoft backed out and instead Sega would be helping them publish the title. MXO was initially slated for a January 2005 release, but was pushed back to March 22nd, 2005. MXO indeed launched on March 22nd, 2005, but despite its massive following and the hype surrounding the title, Matrix Online didn't quite wow the gaming world upon launch. It had some initial reviews that were quite strong, but some more studied reviewers struggled to give the game above a C grade on Metacritic. PC Gamers said, "Matrix Online has done a rare thing. It's taken a movie license and made me feel like a contributor, not a spectator. It captures the feel of Matrix and delivers a sharp, massively multiplayer game, while Eurogamer had less praise. Even if the surface mistakes were removed, its problems are so fundamental to its design that it's hard to imagine it transcending into a serious competitor for the big boys." I'm assuming they're referring to World of Warcraft in this. Overall, players were enjoying the story and world created in MXO, but not quite complimentary of the frankly odd combat and repetitive questing. Despite Monolith's obvious prowess in gaming, they didn't necessarily have the right experience for when their MXO title wasn't exactly wowing critics, let alone experience for a MMO title period. And neither did Warner Brothers. 3 months later, SOE, or Sony Online Entertainment, who was a Goliath in the MMO gaming world at the time, negotiated a deal to buy The Matrix Online from Warner Brothers Games. Now, was Warner Brothers just looking to get rid of the project? Did they really believe that the title was best left in the hands of SOE, who was far more experienced? Regardless, SOE would be taking upon the challenge of Matrix Online's lukewarm reception. Not a whole lot of public information on the updates that SOE implemented, if really any, into Matrix, though we know that the title struggled to eclipse over 50,000 players. Matrix Online was really the first story-based MMO, and the market was unfamiliar with it as a whole. During the times of subscription-based MMOs, it seemed out of place to say the least. Whatever changes were implemented weren't really enough to sway a big enough audience, and on May 29, 2009, a shutdown was rumored on 10 Ton Hammer concerning the fate of MXO. July 31st, 2009 marked the end of Matrix Online, an MMO that lived in general obscurity, almost like what the universe itself had struggled to explain to viewers. But unlike in the movies, the pulling of the plug meant the end of the franchise in this case. There was no more loading into the Matrix. The machines had won. Like with most titles I have covered, Matrix Online was no different in that it had a huge fan who was willing to dedicate part of his life to preserving Matrix Online. Rachko, I believe that's how you pronounce it, as he is known, was able to reverse engineer the coding in Matrix and run the project as an emulator, thus keeping it from being truly dead. Unfortunately, there haven't really been any updates recently, and currently the game is only functioning in your ability to look around and traverse the world. But the developer did mention he was trying to port the engine to Unreal, and was confirmed in doing so by a slew of screenshots posted to the interwebs. But with updates moving slow, and MXO as it was launched no longer existing, it seems that any shot at playing Matrix Online is non-existent. How did such a box office smashed turned MMO fail so epically? How did one of the most well-known universes become one of the most forgotten MMOs? Before we outline the largest contributing factors in the death of Matrix Online, it's important to highlight the most impressive features the game had, to properly explain the importance in its legacy on the video game world. What will The Matrix most be remembered for? Well,
I suppose this is where you offer me a cookie.
for being The Matrix. Likely, and that's not something to take lightly. When you have one of the highest grossing films with one of the largest followings, especially the hardcore fans, you have immense levels of hype before any gameplay was actually shown for MXO. How many of your friends ever tried to bend back as if imitating Neo? Guilty. But many people really did want to experience what it would be like to load into the Matrix. The dystopian world was infectious, it was different. People were fantasizing about how it could transform your life completely in the way that you could dodge bullets even. That's what Matrix Online represented to fans around the globe. Sure, it might not have been implemented in the most exciting way in MXO, but you still very much could feel epic as a character in the Matrix. Not to mention you could fight those pesky agent clones, jumping off of skyscraper buildings, running at blazing speeds through the city, and experience a continuation of the story. It was still a paradise for hardcore fans who were willing to look past the MXO's flaws. Speaking of the story though, at the start of the video, I mentioned how MXO was a continuation of the story in The Matrix, and that's absolutely true. What made that even more impressive when realized in MXO was that there was a dev team dedicated solely to important story role characters. This meant you as the player could speak to a story character like Morpheus, talk about high-quality roleplay. One of the very first things MXO had to offer the players was the ability to directly communicate with storyline characters. As the game opened its doors to players, one arm of the development team was specifically dedicated to writing up and acting out events in The Matrix. The live events team, dubbed LET, was able to take control of main characters to perform live speeches, meet with factions and guilds regarding the state of the Matrix, and provide clues and insight into some of the game's mysteries. This frankly has been both unheard of since and unrivaled in terms of storytelling potential. What if you had the chance to ask a question to a character such as Morpheus? No problem. You could speak to a member of the live events team role-playing as the character appropriately. This provided unparalleled roleplay ability, which is a keystone in a story MMO. It's crazy to think when it's all said and done, people will likely attribute the best story in an MMO to SWTOR, whilst ignoring the strong story in Matrix Online, as well as it being a trailblazer in the story MMO field. Well, that's especially one thing I hope you guys take away from the legacy of Matrix Online. Troubled as it may have been, Matrix Online is still fondly remembered by fans, as the numerous comments asking for a video to be done on it have shown on my channel. And this is even over such large titles as WildStar and SWTOR. So now you guys have gotten to this point of the video and you're probably begging the question, why did Matrix Online fail? What were the largest contributing factors in the death of Matrix Online? Monolith Games surely wasn't a stranger in the world of video games, and still very much is a strong and relevant player in today's current age. But when they accepted to develop Matrix Online for Warner Brothers, they were taking a deep plunge into territory they had yet explored, and doing such right at the tipping point where MMOs were becoming these massive AAA titles. How could Monolith turn down one of the biggest movie production companies, though? Well, from an opportunity standpoint, they couldn't. Sure, their Left-Tech engine was created for FPS games and later immortalized in the cult classic Fear, but it was not made or optimized for an MMO. This obviously meant that they had to spend an immense amount of time and resources to revamp their engine, an engine that was created by them. So clearly they valued it in its familiarity, which in a strange way was a curse for them. As you can likely tell from just watching, let alone playing MXO, the combat and engine was, to put bluntly, atrocious. And that leads us to the next reason that MXO failed. Well, now that the elephant is out of the room, yes, I'm sure all of you watching were waiting for me to address this, and without further delay, the combat in MXO was just awkward. A universe like Matrix is about feeling epic. It's about feeling larger than life, watching your character take turns swinging, missing, dodging with an NPC, and having to click a button repeatedly in order to perform a certain action is not exactly the most fun experience. Especially when compared to another Matrix title, The Matrix Path of Neo. As can be seen on screen, you were able to time quick combos and actions that had you dodging in and out, jumping over people's heads, and being able to shoot guns with extreme efficiency. It was a high thrill, high action combat. MXO, on the other hand, yeah, what's even going on screen? Does anything about that look epic or fun? Even just listening to the sound that the combat makes evokes laughter in me. It sounds like even the sound designers couldn't take it seriously. It's like the sound effects you made as kids. Not to be overly harsh on the combat, but what really made Monolith think that this would be fun for consumers? And why did they think a focused style of camera would be fun to play with? It's hard to even see your surroundings with such, and when you're trying to create this massive world, but then you're telling your players to focus solely on one target and focus all your camera and screen time on that one person, it kind of seems counterproductive to me. When we took a look back at the critics' opinions of MXO, a reoccurring theme we observed was people talking about repetition and the issues it presented for players. Missions were the cornerstone of the game, and missions, unfortunately, were the epitome of repetitive. You would take a mission, they would want you to go to a certain warehouse. At this warehouse, you would either A, find someone you were looking for, B, have to transport the person back or some sort of code back, and fight the goon who was protecting it, pick up the code, rinse and repeat. But the repetition problem in MXO goes past just missions. Even the terrain itself was repetitive. Sure, it's fun to jump and scale buildings and skyscrapers and such, but after a while you realize that many of the buildings and textures are just copy and pasted. The core game of MXO was not a very large game. If anything, it was more like a multiplayer game within MMO-like lobby, sort of like SWTOR. Once you got bored of running around and doing the same missions, there wasn't a whole lot of content except the story for you, and the story eventually comes to an end. And that's where story MMOs struggle. Once people complete the story, you have to, as a developer, create side games or aspects of the title that allow people to waste and spend time doing, well, instead of doing the main story. SWTOR more recently has done this with their newest expansions, but MXO was really ahead of its time in certain ways, story most especially, and that likely was its biggest failure. For a story about advanced technology, the technology for the time wasn't really as advanced as MXO possibly needed in order to succeed. I can already hear a few of you asking me why I didn't mention SOE and how SOE clearly was the reason that MXO failed. But instead of dedicating an entire section to that, I'll just leave you guys with the idea that by the time SOE took over MXO, the engine and foundation of the game was set in stone. SOE just did what SOE always did, run the MMO as a business while trying to be as profitable as possible. And that's not particularly bad morally, it's just, well, SOE. MXO should not be forgotten though. Its impact was greater than some people might have imagined. But like most visionary titles, without strong legs to stand on, innovation can only last for so long until the next bigger shiny thing comes along. This is your last chance. After this, there's no turning back, guys. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed believing whatever you want to believe. You take that red pill, you like, favorite, comment, and subscribe to my channel. You stay in the Wonderland, and I will continue to show you guys how deep that rabbit hole of failed MMOs goes.